Live TV wasn't ready for what happened next. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, with nothing to lose, brought out a hidden investigation, and Melania Trump couldn't hide behind silence this time. It was supposed to be just another political segment for guests, one moderator, and a primetime audience expecting more of the same. People tuning in from living rooms across America had no idea they were about to witness one of the most jaw-dropping moments in recent memory. The set was standard, dark blue backlit panels, high chairs, and coffee mugs nobody actually drank from. Seated third from the left, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett looked calm, almost reserved, in a tailored navy blazer. Her expression didn't change much throughout the first 20 minutes. She listened, made notes, and said little. But when the host pivoted the conversation toward ethics and politics, something shifted. The camera cut to Melania Trump, seated across from Jasmine, elegant, poised. She was doing what she'd done countless times before, sidestepping tough questions with practiced charm. The audience didn't blink. They'd seen this routine. But Jasmine leaned forward not too far, just enough to send a silent message. "I'm ready," while Jasmine said, her voice smooth but firm. "Since we're talking about ethics, let's stop pretending some people get a free pass just because of who they married." The panel went quiet. The host blinked. Melania tilted, her head slightly. "I'm sorry, was that directed at me?" Jasmine didn't flinch. She reached into her bag, not frantically, not dramatically, and pulled out a neatly stacked folder. She placed it on the table, slid off the clip, and began laying out photocopied records one after another. "These are transaction logs, offshore account filings, and a report from an abandoned investigation in upstate New York," Jasmine said calmly. "Every single one has a connection to your name." You could hear a pen drop. Melania's eyes flicked down at the documents. She opened her mouth, closed it, and looked at the host. "That's absurd," she finally said, with a nervous smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "This is clearly an attack. I won't engage in conspiracy theories." "It's not a theory if it's backed by court records and banking logs," Jasmine replied. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Behind the cameras, producers were scrambling. Someone in the control booth was signaling frantically. One of the assistants handed a note to the host, but the damage was already done. Clips of the exchange were being recorded and clipped live by viewers on social media. Within minutes, hashtags like #CrockettVsMelania and #JasmineHasReceipts began trending. Melania tried to pivot. "We're here to talk about America's future, not dig up ancient nonsense from foreign countries." Jasmine interrupted gently. "With all due respect, when your past raises questions about money laundering and influence, it is America's the future." The moderator, finally regaining his voice, tried to steer the conversation away. "Let's stay on topic, please." "I am on topic," Jasmine said, not looking away. "The topic is accountability." People watching at home were glued to their screens. No one had ever confronted Melania like that, especially not on live national television. Not with facts, not with documentation, not with the kind of confidence that says, "I know what I'm doing, and I know what I'm risking." And just like that, the story slipped out of the studio's control. But before Jasmine ever touched that folder, she'd already made peace with what might come next. 3 days before the roundtable, Jasmine sat across from her chief of staff, in a quiet corner booth at a diner just outside Fort Worth, the kind of place where the waitresses still called you hun and refilled your coffee without asking. Jasmine wasn't hungry. She had a folder in front of her, not the same one she'd carry on to live television, but close. "This isn't just political," her aide, Kenny Rose, said as he leaned in, his voice low. "You're talking about Melania and Trump. They're gonna come after you hard." Jasmine stirred her coffee but didn't drink it. "Let them," she said quietly. "People need to stop pretending she was just an accessory in all of this. There's paperwork, Kenny. There's proof." Kenny sighed and glanced toward the window. "Proof don't always win. Sometimes it just gets you buried." She didn't answer right away. Jasmine had spent most of her adult life walking into rooms where she wasn't expected to talk, let alone lead a black woman from the south side of Dallas with no family money, no legacy name, just grit and receipts. She'd fought her way through law school, spent years as a public defender, and eventually made it to Congress on the backs of grassroots supporters who believed in her fire. Not everyone in Washington respected her, but they feared how sharp she was when she spoke. "I'm not trying to start a fire," she finally said. "I'm trying to show people it's already burning." Back at her apartment that night, she went through every page again, reports from an abandoned fraud case in Syracuse that no one ever followed up on, signatures from Melanian's alleged European ventures with names misspelled and dates mismatched. Then there were the financial documents, wire transfers to shell companies in the British Virgin Islands, dated just a year before Donald Trump began his campaign. She didn't have the whole picture, but she had enough corners to make out what had once been hidden. Still, there was a weight to it, not just the threat of lawsuits or political blowback. This was a personal gamble. She wasn't just going after a former First Lady. She was taking on the machinery that had kept powerful people protected for decades. Her phone buzzed, a message from a friend at an independent outlet in Pittsburgh. "Are you seriously going through with this? They'll twist it. They'll say you're angry, unstable." Jasmine stared at the screen for a moment before replying. "They always say that until they can't." The next morning, she reached out to a retired federal clerk named Dolores Finney, who'd quietly shared the Syracuse case files with her years earlier. Dolores was in her late 70s now, mostly off the grid, but still sharp. "You sure you're ready to go public?" Dolores asked, her voice calm and raspy through the speakerphone. "They've buried too much," Jasmine said. "You and I both know this woman's past didn't just disappear. It was erased on purpose." Dolores paused, then with a dry laugh said, "You've got bigger balls than half the people I worked with at the DOJ. Jasmine smiled, but the weight never really left her chest. Courage always came with a clock ticking somewhere in the distance. By the time she walked into the studio on the day of the show, the folder felt heavier than it should have, not physically, emotionally. She knew she wouldn't get a second shot at this. Either she said it clearly the first time, or the moment would slip through the cracks of manufactured outrage and PR spin. But what no one saw behind the cameras was the conversation she had with herself in the hallway. Mirror 10 minutes before. Airtime: be surgical, be steady, don't yell, let the facts do the shouting. Then she whispered the same 3 words she always said before walking into something that scared her. Tell the truth. She walked past the stage manager, past the flashing red countdown light, past the fake smiles from guests who thought today was just going to be business as usual. And when she sat down and looked across the table at Melania and Trump, she didn't see a former First Lady. She saw someone protected by silence. And Jasmine had already decided she wasn't going to be part of that silence anymore. But to understand what Jasmine knew, we have to go back even further into the details. Melania spent years trying to keep buried. Long before she was a household name, Melania was just Melania Norse from Sevnica, Slovenia. According to the glossy profiles and rehearsed interviews, her rise from a modest Eastern European town to First Lady was nothing short of a fairy tale. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't interested in fairy tales. She wanted to know what had been left out of the story. One of her interns, a sharp 24-year-old named Troy Whitman, had been the first to flag inconsistencies in Melanian's early modeling and business records. They had been combing through archived registries from Europe and found 3 separate companies tied to her name, none of which were ever disclosed during her husband's campaign. She signed off on a patent application in Zurich in '98. Troy told Jasmine one afternoon as they sat in a cramped Capitol Hill office. Problem is, she claimed in interviews that she was already in the US full-time by then. Jasmine leaned over the documents. What kind of patent? Jewelry designs. Very vague, but the paper trail doesn't go cold until 2003, which means she had ongoing business ties overseas long after she claimed she didn't. It might have sounded harmless, jewelry designs, old paperwork, but Jasmine had practiced law long enough to know what offshore accounts were often used for, especially when the transactions didn't match the timelines presented to the public. Then came the Pennsylvania connection. A closed lawsuit had been filed in 2006 in Allegheny County under the name Mesknaus Holdings. At first glance, it looked like a routine real estate dispute, but tucked in the appendix was a sealed affidavit alleging wire fraud with signatures redacted. The judge, now retired, had sealed the file under national interest. No one looked deeper, no one wanted to. Troy looked up from his laptop. She's got too many names attached to too many small, shady businesses. Either she was laundering money, or she's the unluckiest entrepreneur on earth. That comment stuck with Jasmine. For days, she began building a timeline: 1996 to 2006. Modeling gigs, green card inconsistencies, a boutique fashion line registered under a cousin's name in New Mexico, a short-lived consulting company in Miami with 0 employees and 1 massive loan. It wasn't just suspicious. It was structured. Jasmine reached out to a contact in Harrisburg, someone who used to work in the state's financial crimes unit. He agreed to talk under the condition that his name never appeared in anything official. "You want my opinion?" he said after skimming through the files Jasmine sent over. It was a cover operation, shells to pull money through. Nothing big enough to make headlines, but just enough to keep people quiet. And the federal agencies, either they weren't looking, or someone told them not to. That's what burned the most, not the alleged crimes themselves, but how quickly silence moved in when the names got powerful. Melania had spent years shaping her image, always the elegant observer, never quite in the room when decisions were made. The world saw her as distant but harmless. But Jasmine saw it differently. The distance wasn't detachment, it was protection. The more she dug, the more it became clear. Melania hadn't just benefited from privilege. She had learned how to disappear behind it. There was one moment Jasmine kept coming back to: a charity gala in Dallas, 2012. Jasmine had been invited as a guest of a local firm. Melania had flown in for a brief appearance. She spoke for 12 minutes, didn't answer questions, and left through the back hallway with two men who weren't listed as part of her staff. Jasmine remembered because it was the first time she noticed how guarded Melanian was, even in a friendly room. She's not untouchable, Jasmine told Kenny one late night in the office. She just walks like no one's allowed to ask questions. Kenny looked exhausted. Yeah, but if you're gonna ask, make sure you have the kind of answers no one can spin. Jasmine held up her growing stack of folders. That's exactly what I'm building. And once she had enough, she stopped talking about it. She didn't tease it to the press. She didn't leak pieces to pundits. She waited. She watched. When that live roundtable came knocking, she knew this wasn't about scoring political points. It was about asking the question that too many people had ignored. Why has this woman's past always been treated as a What made it even more complicated was the case that never made it to court, the one that vanished just as it was heating up. The case file had no title on the cover, just a date, June 17, 2011. Location, Syracuse, New York. It was thin, about 12 pages long, but every sentence inside it carried weight. Jasmine had gotten it through a retired paralegal named Rodney Klein, who'd once worked for the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Northern District of New York. He still had copies of old files the system had misplaced. This one, Rodney said, sliding the file across his kitchen table, wasn't supposed to vanish, but someone made it disappear. Inside was a memo referencing a woman named McNels, a known alias of Melania before she changed the spelling of her name in official U.S. documents. The memo outlined a federal inquiry into a suspected financial funneling scheme involving small real estate purchases, sudden resales, and offshore payments that didn't match tax records. The key witness was a Slovenian-born accountant named Lydia Corky, who had quietly been cooperating with the IRS at the time. She'd been living in Buffalo under a temporary visa, working through an amnesty program for whistleblowers. But her cooperation had come at a price. She vanished, Rodney said. 2 weeks after this memo, she stopped showing up to check-ins, never picked up her last stipend, and her apartment was cleared out overnight. Jasmine flipped through the pages. Any chance she went home? Rodney shook his head. Passports were flagged, no flight records, nothing. At the time, the case was labeled inactive. Eventually it was closed under insufficient supporting testimony. In short, without Lydia, the case died quietly. No headlines, no accountability. Jasmine sat with that for a long time. She contacted an old friend at the Syracuse Herald, a local reporter named Chelsea Morano, who had covered the story briefly. When it first emerged, back then, no one knew the full scope, and few people cared, Chelsea told her over the phone. We tried to follow up, but the federal office stonewalled us. Then 2 of our editors got pulled into private meetings, and the story just vanished. Did you ever hear Melanian's name in connection to it? Jasmine asked. Chelsea hesitated. Never on record, but there were whispers back then. We thought it was crazy. A Slovenian model mixed up in real estate laundering seemed like a reach. But now, I'm not so sure. Jasmine stared out the window of her office, watching the rain slide down the glass. Everything about the case reeked of interference, quiet, sophisticated interference. There was also a list of properties, 7 in total, bought and sold through shell companies in upstate New York. Each one was purchased for under $400,000. And resold within 18 months for at least double. No renovations, no clear buyers, just paper trails that went in circles. The final buyer on 3 of those homes was a trust linked to a man Melania had reportedly dated in the 1990s. Someone with close ties to European banking networks. The deeper Jasmine looked, the clearer the pattern became. Identities were being moved around like chess pieces. One wrong question, and the game disappeared. She printed every page, every map, every note, and pinned it all on her office wall like a detective piecing together a cold case. Kenny walked in one afternoon and just stared. "You're not letting this go, are you?" Jasmine didn't even look up, "Would you?" He shook his head, then pulled up a chair. "So, what's the plan? We show people that power has fingerprints even when it wears a designer gown and smiles for the cameras." There was one last thing in the file that Jasmine couldn't ignore, a letter, unsigned, typed, and scanned. It read, "To whom it may concern, there are names you're not supposed to say and places you're not supposed to look. If you keep going, don't expect applause, expect silence. Expect doors to close. But do it anyway. Some things are worth the price." Jasmine had no idea who wrote it, but she read that line over and over again. Do it anyway. That letter was why she didn't hesitate when the round table invitation came. That letter was why she printed the documents, packed the folder, and told no one, not even her communications director, what she was about to do. Because when a system counts on silence, the loudest thing you can do is speak. But the round table didn't just catch Melania off guard. It sent shockwaves into a carefully managed world that wasn't built to be questioned. The producers had everything scheduled down to the second, a 7-minute opener on bipartisan strategy, then a short debate on immigration reform, followed by a 10-minute panel on political accountability. That's where they slotted Jasmine. What they didn't plan for, what no one planned for, was what she brought with her. The studio was in Stamford, Connecticut, neutral ground, no DC theatrics, no Capitol Hill pretense. The cameras were discreet, but the stakes were real. 5 guests, 4 mics, 1 host. The segment was meant to be polished, safe, and forgettable. The host, a man named Felix Roman, had been doing this for over 20 years. He was the kind of anchor who could glide through controversy like it was choreography. Until now, as Jasmine laid out the evidence in front of her, the air in the room shifted. Felix looked at the camera, then back at Jasmine, clearly unsure whether to cut to break or lean in. The producers in the control room waved frantically through the glass, but he didn't move. Something about her tone held him. "You're saying Melania Trump was connected to financial misconduct during the time her husband was planning his presidential campaign?" he asked, trying to slow things down. "I'm saying," Jasmine replied, flipping to another page in her folder, "that there were financial structures tied to her name structures that moved money through New York, Pennsylvania, and Delaware, under the names of companies that didn't exist past a single tax season." Melania's expression didn't change, but her hands gripped the arms of her chair just a bit tighter. Her PR assistant, sitting just off camera, shifted in her seat. Felix tried again. "These are serious allegations. Have they been verified?" "Most of them have been ignored," Jasmine said, her tone never rising. "But they were never hidden. You just had to look. And someone finally did." That line, "you just had to look," was clipped and reposted online before the segment even ended. Melania finally spoke. "This is political theater. I'm not going to dignify these lies with a response." Jasmine met her eyes for the first time. "If they're lies, you should welcome an investigation." Silence. Even the studio lighting felt hotter. Felix cleared his throat. "Okay, let's get back to," but it was already too late. The control room's earpieces were erupting with calls from the network, affiliates, and sponsors. Some wanted the feed cut. Others begged them to keep rolling. They'd never had this kind of engagement in real time. Melania shifted strategy. "You're attacking me because you have no real policy. You're not talking about the economy or healthcare. You're obsessed with tearing down women who succeed." Jasmine's response was fast but firm. "If success comes at the cost of silence and manipulation, it deserves to be examined. I'm not here to tear anyone down. I'm here to speak up when too many people have been told to look the other way." The panelists sat frozen. One of them, a former federal prosecutor from Phoenix, whispered to his neighbor off mic, "This is going to blow up big time." After the segment wrapped, Felix walked off stage, shaking his head. "We just aired the most important 7 minutes of the year," he muttered, "and none of it was in the script." Melania stormed out. No press availability, no handshake. Her team moved quickly. Her assistant was on the phone with legal counsel before they even reached the elevator. A junior staffer tried to recover the folder from Jasmine's desk during cleanup, but Jasmine had already taken it with her. Backstage, a few of the makeup artists clapped quietly as Jasmine walked by. She didn't smile. She didn't need to dot by the time she reached the curb outside. Her phone was already vibrating non-stop messages, missed calls. Her Twitter notifications were exploding. One text stood out. It was from a woman Jasmine hadn't spoken to in years. a retired IRS investigator from Cleveland. It said, "You said what most of us were too afraid to proto. I'm proud of you." But Jasmine didn't have time to take it in. The backlash was coming, and it wouldn't be subtle. What started in a studio chair was about to ripple through the political machine like a cracked wire no one could fix. By the time Jasmine made it back to her hotel room, her phone had hit 67 missed calls, 23 voicemails, and hundreds of text messages. She tossed it on the bed and stood by the window, watching the traffic move like nothing had happened. For the first time all day, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Down the hall, Kenny was already fielding media requests: MSNBC, The Hill, a handful of podcasts. Everyone wanted a piece of what had just happened. But Jasmine wasn't thinking about interviews. She was thinking about how fast the machine was about to push back. And it didn't take long. At 10:14 p.m., a carefully worded statement from Melania's legal team hit the wire. The Congresswoman's remarks were defamatory and entirely unfounded. "We are exploring all legal options to protect Mrs. Trump's reputation from politically motivated slander." That line, "exploring all legal options," was the signal, the warning shot, the attempt to intimidate. Kenny walked into the room, his laptop open. "They're calling it character assassination," he said, "and Fox is already spinning it as a racist attack from an angry black woman." Jasmine didn't flinch. "Let them spin. The documents don't lie. They don't have to," Kenny muttered. "They just have to make people doubt." Inbox was also flooded, some of it supportive, messages from colleagues, strangers, even staffers from across the aisle. But it was the anonymous ones that stood out. One email read, "You think you're brave. Keep pushing, and you'll disappear just like the last one." Another was just a video attachment footage of her walking to her car the night before, taken from across the street. "You need to report this," Kenny said when he saw it. "I know," Jasmine replied. "But first, I want to know who sent it." A cybersecurity firm on retainer started digging immediately. They traced the IP to a proxy server based in Odessa, Texas. No clear identity, no easy trail. But Jasmine had dealt with this kind of shadow work before. What surprised her wasn't the threats. It was how fast the PR machine tried to rewrite the narrative. Within hours, right-wing commentators were already flooding social media, claiming Jasmine forged the documents. A few even said she had personal beef with Melania going back years. A complete fabrication. That night, Jasmine's name was trending alongside terms like race baiting, publicity stunt, and fabricated scandal. The playbook was clear: discredit her before anyone took a real look at what she said. But the thing was, some people already had. Around midnight, a journalist named Farah Odom from the Indianapolis Ledger posted a thread breaking down documents line by line. She included scans of court records, timelines, and transaction dates. Within 3 hours, her post had over 600,000 likes and nearly 100,000 retweets. Farah wasn't a pundit. She was a fact-checker, respected, quiet, and deadly accurate. Her final tweet read, "If even half of what Representative Crockett presented is accurate, it deserves congressional attention. This isn't drama, it's fraud." That was the moment the tone started shifting. Jasmine sat up, reading every comment and every article. It didn't feel like vindication. It felt like the start of something she couldn't control anymore. Then came the email that froze her in place. The subject line read, "Regarding the 2011 Syracuse memo, no name, no sender." She clicked. Inside was a single sentence. "You missed the Cayman transfer. Check the dates." Attached was a PDF with 3 wire transfer records she hadn't seen before. The account name matched one of the shell companies she had flagged earlier in the week. Kenny glanced over her shoulder. "Where did this come from?" "I don't know," Jasmine said, "but it's legit." She didn't sleep that night. Too much movement. Too many pieces falling at once. The next morning, she walked into her office in D.C. to find a stack of messages waiting for her. One from the Office of Congressional Ethics, another from a legal oversight committee, and then the kicker, a call from a Republican senator's staffer requesting a private meeting. Kenny raised an eyebrow. "That's new. They smell blood in the water," Jasmine said. "They don't want to be caught pretending they didn't know." But what no one expected, what not even Jasmine saw coming, was how quickly the people outside of politics would pick a side. It started with a video clip, just 31 seconds long. Jasmine Crockett, seated at the round table, calmly sliding a document across the desk as she says, "If there are lies, you should welcome an investigation." That clip was reposted by a political blog with less than 1,000 followers, then a digital rights group, then a retired journalist with a strong YouTube following. By noon the next day, it had over 11 million views. And then came the reaction videos. Teenagers on TikTok breaking down the exchange like it was a sports replay. Legal analysts doing frame-by-frame analysis. Even comedians stitching in commentary, calling it the most elegant takedown in political history. But the momentum wasn't just online. Local radio stations in Philadelphia and Cincinnati opened their morning shows talking about it. Book clubs and church groups passed the video through group chats. People were having conversations they hadn't dared have before. Jasmine sat on the edge of her office desk, arms crossed, watching the numbers rise. Kenny scrolled beside her, stunned. We didn't push this. We didn't plant it, and yet, here we are. People were ready for something real, Jasmine said. They're tired of everyone pretending like power can't be touched. Somewhere around the 15 million mark, celebrities started weighing in. An actress posted, I've never seen someone hold their own like that. Crockett didn't shout, she just showed up with the truth. An NBA player shared the video with 3 words, we need more of this. Even more surprising were the DMs coming in from people Jasmine would have never expected. Former campaign staffers for political rivals. Staffers from think tanks, even to former Trump insiders who'd once proudly defended Melania. One message stood out. It was from a woman named Katya Merkovich, who claimed to have worked briefly on one of Melania's early branding campaigns, back in 2004. Her message read, everything she's saying it's real. I didn't understand it back then, but I saw how things were structured. We weren't allowed to keep records, and her cousin handled all the contracts cash only. Jasmine passed the message to her legal advisor. If she agrees to speak, even off the record, we can cross-check what we've got. Meanwhile, Jasmine's team set up a separate encrypted inbox for new tips. Within 48 hours, they had over 400 submissions. A retired bookkeeper from Wilmington, a former assistant at a Miami consultancy, even someone who once worked at a law firm that handled overseas patent filings. Not everyone had proof, but the stories were consistent. Movements of money, missing invoices, projects that existed only on paper. By Friday, the public tide had clearly turned. It wasn't just a trending moment anymore. It was a national conversation. Cable news anchors were split. Some tried to downplay it as an overreach by a first-term congresswoman. Others called for investigations. But it was the smaller local outlets that carried the real heat. Op-eds started pouring in with titles like, Why did we ever stop asking questions about Melania? And it took a woman like Jasmine Crockett to say what we were all thinking. Silence isn't grace, it's strategy. Jasmine didn't do any press. She didn't tweet a word. Her silence only added to the storm. Meanwhile, Melania's team began to buckle. First, they cancelled a scheduled speech at a university fundraiser in Tampa. Then, they pulled out of a women's summit in Palm Desert. Behind the scenes, lawyers were reportedly scrambling to review past filings, old partnerships, and every document that could be tied to the resurfacing allegations. Still, Melania made no public appearance, no video, no interview, just a new statement posted quietly on her website. These attacks are deeply personal and rooted in division. I have always upheld the highest standards of integrity. This campaign to destroy my character will not succeed. It sounded rehearsed, cold, disconnected, the complete opposite of Jasmine's direct, no-nonsense tone on live TV. And that contrast, that raw human clarity from Jasmine, was what people connected with. One woman in Montana wrote in a letter to the editor, I don't care about parties anymore. That woman spoke like someone who had nothing to lose and everything to protect. That matters. Kenny looked up from the growing pile of messages and said, we started something. Jasmine didn't smile. She just said, now we finish it. But the closer Jasmine got to the truth, the more dangerous the silence around it became. By the second weekend after the broadcast, Jasmine had gotten used to waking up to voicemails from blocked numbers. Some were just heavy breathing. Others played short clips of audio recordings from her public speeches, distorted, cut, twisted into mockery. She didn't flinch, but she didn't ignore them either. Security was tightened. The Capitol Police assigned 2 plainclothes officers to follow her on all public appearances. Her apartment building in D.C. added surveillance. Kenny suggested she stay in a hotel for a while. Jasmine refused. I won't let anyone scare me out of my own life, she said. Still, the tension was building, quiet pressure, strategic discomfort. She could feel it in meetings that used to be easy, see it in the way some of her colleagues avoided eye contact in the halls. One staffer who had always been warm and chatty now gave her polite nods and kept walking. The message was clear, becoming a liability. That Monday morning she received an unexpected visitor. Howard Reams, a senior figure from the House Oversight Committee. appeared at her office without an appointment, gray suit, briefcase, expression like granite. "We need to talk, Jasmine," he said, closing the door behind him. She gestured toward a seat but didn't sit herself. "What about optics? You're attracting the wrong kind of attention." "I'm attracting the truth," she replied. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "There are quiet ways to handle things. Like this, you go too loud, and it becomes a circus. No one listens to substance once the shouting starts." Jasmine folded her arms. "I didn't shout. I presented documents." Howard leaned forward. "You embarrassed a very powerful family on national television. Whether you meant to or not, you created a moment that's now spiraling." "I didn't create the spiral. I opened the lid," she shot back. He sighed. "You want my advice? Let it rest. Don't escalate. Let the public move on. You've made your point." But she'd heard that tone before, the voice of men who preferred silence over confrontation, calm over truth. She knew how this game worked. Pressure in private, platitudes in public. After he left, Kenny walked in with another message, this one from a well-connected lobbyist offering to support Jasmine's re-election fund in exchange for a statement softening her position. Jasmine didn't respond. Later that day, a former journalist named Ines Gallardo reached out from Arizona. She'd worked on a piece about foreign influence in U.S. philanthropy back in 2015, but was pushed out by her editor before it published. She'd seen Melania's name back then, too. "I still have my notes," Ines said over the phone. "The names, the transactions, even a photo of one of the shell company agents. I didn't forget, I just didn't think anyone else would care." Jasmine arranged for her to send everything securely. The story was bigger than she thought. It wasn't just about Melania's personal records anymore. It was about an entire web, foundations, corporations, silent partners, some of which were still active, some of which had helped shape policy. And every time Jasmine brought one thread forward, another one unraveled behind it. Even her own supporters grew nervous. A Democratic donor group emailed her campaign manager, expressing deep concern about the direction of her public image. One line stuck out: "We support courage, but not recklessness." Kenny slammed the laptop shut. "They want clean heroes, not messy trustellers." "Then they picked the wrong woman," Jasmine replied. The final straw that week came late Thursday night. A courier delivered an unmarked envelope to her office. Inside was a printed still image from a security camera showing her walking through Reagan Airport with a red circle around her head. No message, no sender, just a picture that said, "We see you." She showed it to Kenny, who sat in stunned silence. "You okay?" he asked finally. "I'm angry," she said. "Not scared, just angry." She took the image, taped it to her office wall above the growing mess of documents and evidence, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of who she was dealing with, because fear is their currency, and Jasmine refused to buy in. But the pressure wasn't slowing her down. It was preparing her for what came next, the part where truth stepped into the spotlight, and the world had to watch. The hearing room wasn't built for drama. Pale beige walls, stiff-backed chairs, microphones that never quite worked right. But when Jasmine Crockett walked through the double doors that morning, you could feel the weight shift. It had been 19 days since the roundtable went viral. Now, under mounting public pressure and a flood of bipartisan concern, the House Subcommittee on Government Oversight had scheduled a formal review to discuss Jasmine's claims. What had started as a 7-minute interruption on a live show was now a congressional matter. Cameras lined the walls, reporters scribbled fast, viewers tuned in from airports, offices, living rooms. They weren't just curious anymore. They wanted answers. The room was full but quiet. Jasmine wore a plain dark blazer, no statement jewelry, no bright colors, just focus. Representative Harold Klein, who chaired the subcommittee, opened with a neutral tone. "Today's session is not a trial. It is not a political spectacle. It is a step toward clarity." He turned toward Jasmine. "Congresswoman Crockett, the floor is yours." She didn't thank him, didn't posture. She adjusted the mic and began. "Everything I presented was based on documentation obtained through legal and public channels, court filings, financial transfers, recorded transactions. This isn't about politics. It's about patterns that suggest misuse of trust, of power, and of silence." She paused, then added, "If these patterns were tied to anyone else, anyone without that last name, this room would have been full years ago." Gasps were subtle but present. Klein looked uncomfortable, flipping through his folder. A junior representative from Maine cleared her throat, trying to refrain. "Are you saying the former First Lady is guilty of a crime?" Jasmine replied, I'm saying she was involved in a structure that deserves investigation, and that until now, no one had the stomach to ask the hard questions. At that moment, a document was projected behind her, one of the verified wire transfers routed through a shell entity in Dover, Delaware. Jasmine walked the committee through the details: date, recipient, origin account, and the matching number from a Slovenian asset ledger, all of it connected. The room didn't breathe. Melania Trump was not in attendance. Her legal team submitted a statement: Mrs. Trump has nothing to hide. She will not dignify political bullying with her presence. But the cameras were already panning to every empty chair around the table. The symbolism spoke for itself. Halfway through the session, something unexpected happened. A former financial compliance officer, unlisted on the witness roster, stood up in the gallery and quietly handed an envelope to the sergeant-at-arms. Inside were copies of 6 invoices tied to a charity fund Melania had once publicly supported in Florida. None of the funds had ever reached their stated beneficiaries. The committee froze. Jasmine looked at the documents as they were passed. To her, she said nothing for a few seconds. Then, this is what happens when you crack the door open. People finally come forward. By late afternoon, the story was everywhere again, but with more weight this time. It wasn't just social media buzz. It was real questions from real people, backed by real documents. Even cable networks that had initially dismissed the roundtable were broadcasting highlights from the hearing on loop. Kenny watched from the side, arms crossed. This wasn't what they expected when they first stepped into that diner in Fort Worth 3 weeks earlier. He whispered to a staffer, "I thought we were going to shake a tree. We started an avalanche." Outside, protesters had gathered. Some held signs in support of Jasmine. Others shouted that she was a liar, a pawn, or worse, the usual chaos of controversy. But she didn't hear it. She stayed inside, watching the room change around her. As the hearing closed, Representative Klein cleared his throat again. "We will reconvene next week after reviewing the additional materials submitted today. But the records show that this is far from over." Jasmine nodded, stood, and left the room without a word. Cameras followed. Microphones extended. She said nothing, but people were speaking for her now, strangers, experts, survivors of financial fraud who recognized the signs in what she'd revealed. Voices that had once been buried were now echoing across the country. Her story had turned into a spark. Now the country was watching the fire. But the point of the fire was never destruction. It was to burn away what was hiding underneath. 2 weeks after the hearing, Jasmine found herself alone on a quiet balcony outside her district office in Arlington, Texas. The sun was low, her inbox was still full. Reporters were still calling, investigators were still asking for more. But for the first time in over a month, the noise around her felt manageable, focused. Kenny joined her with a fresh stack of messages. 2 more subpoenas sent out this morning, and the committee's reviewing the charity files next week. Jasmine nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She looked out toward the skyline and said, "You know what I keep thinking about? The people who wanted me to leave it alone, who told me I was overreaching, that I'd ruin my career if I opened my mouth." Kenny said, "You didn't ruin anything. You reminded people why truth still matters." But she knew it was more complicated than that. Her staff had received threats. Her mother had been harassed online. Lobbyists had pulled out of meetings. And yet, she had no regrets. This had never been about taking down Melania Trump. It had always been about breaking the illusion that if someone was rich enough, polished enough, or quiet enough, they didn't have to answer for their past. That illusion was gone now. Whether or not charges were ever filed, whether or not congressional hearings continued, something had shifted. People had seen what it looked like when someone stood up and didn't back down, and more importantly, they saw what it took to do it. In the weeks following the hearing, more whistleblowers came forward: a former attorney who handled foreign licensing deals, a bank analyst who flagged suspicious transactions in 2010, even a Slovenian journalist who'd been blacklisted after publishing a piece about Melania's early financial dealings. None of them had spoken before. Now they were sending files, statements, willing to testify. One woman, a translator from New Jersey, left a voicemail Jasmine would never forget. "I stayed quiet for years because I didn't think anyone would listen. But you made them listen. You didn't scream. You didn't run. You just showed up with the truth. Thank you." That message stuck with Jasmine more than any headline or trending hashtag. She knew people still doubted her. They always would. She'd heard the rumors that she was doing it for attention, that she was bitter, that she was trying to build a brand. All the old labels meant to shrink someone who refused to sit down. But none of it mattered now. What mattered was the ripple she started in classrooms, Students were studying the hearing as part of media literacy units. Activist groups were using her case as a template to push for transparency legislation. Other lawmakers, quietly at first, had begun asking deeper questions about financial disclosures, foundations, and foreign connections. Jasmine wasn't trying to become a movement. She just wanted to tell the truth and not be punished for it. And in doing that, she reminded people of something they'd almost forgotten. Silence may protect the powerful, but courage exposes what power tries to hide. Kenny returned to the office and handed her a letter. No name, just a return address in Des Moines. It read, "I used to believe the system couldn't be challenged, that people like me didn't matter. But watching you stand up with facts in your hand and fire in your voice, made me believe again. Thank you for making me feel seen." Jasmine folded the letter and slipped it into her desk drawer. She didn't know who wrote it, but she knew exactly why it was sent. Not every battle ends in court. Some end in change. And sometimes, the biggest victory is simply refusing to be quiet. She turned to Kenny and said, "This isn't over." "No," he said, "but now they know who's watching." And that was the difference. So when people ask about the day Jasmine Crockett challenged Melania Trump on live television, the documents she laid out, and the firestorm that followed, it's not just a story about scandal or headlines. It's a story about what happens when one person, with nothing to gain and everything to risk, chooses to tell the truth anyway. If this story moved you, if it made you think twice about silence, speak up, share this, talk about it. Because the moment we stop asking questions is the moment we give our power away. And if you believe the truth still matters, subscribe. More stories are coming.